short videos looking at the issue of what do children most need from us in foster care. I'm going to base what I say on some very exciting research that's come out in the last decade or so, as well as some of my own experiences as a carer in a group home. We used to call them house parents in those days, and as a youth worker for many years. We had all the usual challenges you might expect looking after young teenage children. And I just want to tell you about one of the incidents that I remembered recently. It's about Lisa, a 13-year-old who had been with us for about a year. And Lisa was one of those very shy, withdrawn teenage kids. We had decided that we'd let the kids go out by themselves into town. And so Lisa took a buddy with her and she went out shopping. We told the kids that they had responsibility to look after each other, to go where they said that they were going, and also to be back on time, and that was 10 o'clock. And at about 9:45 that evening, the buddy came back without Lisa. Of course, we were very worried, and the buddy told us that they'd had a fight and Lisa had gone off by herself. Come 10, she wasn't there. 10:15, she hadn't come back, so we decided we're going to have to mount a search party and go out and look for Lisa. Just as we were getting ready, we heard a knock at the front door, a noise. We went to see what it was, and there was Lisa, completely drunk, hardly able to stand up. So we brought her in and she threw up on the carpet. And then she threw herself onto a chair and just curled up into a ball. We were annoyed, we were angry, frustrated with Lisa. We just told her that she had to behave herself, she had to be responsible. She had left her buddy, she hadn't gone where she said she was going to go, and we felt that there had to be a consequence for that. In those days we had a points and a level system in the house. And so, because Lisa had been disobedient, that meant she lost 100 points, and she also dropped a level of trust. So I proceeded to lecture Lisa. She started to cry. And I was very confused. I was an older teenager myself at the time. What do you do in a situation like that? And then through her tears she said, "I've never had a birthday party." I was a bit perplexed about that. What's that got to do with getting drunk? But then I remembered that earlier in the day, we had had a small birthday party for one of the other kids in the care. It was just a normal little ritual of life, but for Lisa, it symbolized for her all the things that she had missed out during her lonely childhood. She had been brought up by a single mum who was really struggling with issues of depression and alcohol dependence. Lisa had been reported many times to the authorities. She'd been in and out of foster care, and just finally at about 12 it was decided to take her into care for a longer period of time. What do you do when you're faced with a situation like this? How do you respond? What should we do to try and address Lisa's needs? I was feeling bad by that time because Lisa was obviously very upset. So I said to her, next time you have a birthday, we'll make sure you have a party too. But I also felt a little bit guilty because in those days we felt it was very important that we had to teach the kids how they should behave. The focus was on the behavior, not what's going on inside the kids. So I had to reinforce to her, Lisa, even though you felt so sad, you still will lose 100 points because you showed that you didn't make the right choice about your behavior. I'm going to return to this little story in a little while to just try and illustrate how I've changed my thinking, and I think we all have changed our thinking about what the needs of children are when they're in care. I'm sure you would have heard about trauma theory or the trauma framework or the word trauma, because we're talking about trauma a lot more these days, and that's probably because of all the research that's been coming out in the last little while. It's transformed the way I think about how we should respond to kids in care, especially kids like Lisa, and has really changed what we do and what we prioritize, what we see as the most important things. Trauma theory is based on what happens to children when they're exposed to things like abuse and neglect over a long period of time. The chronic stress that occurs and how that affects their developing brains, but how this affects also their behavior, their thinking, their emotions. Children affected by severe trauma, and that's most of the children in care, have all the usual needs of developing children. You know, the need for nurture, for food, for comfort, all those things that we provide to kids, whatever their backgrounds. But they also have special needs, needs that are specifically related to the trauma that they've experienced. We can call these trauma-related needs, or traumagenic needs, or trauma needs. There's different words that are given to these sort of needs. There are three main trauma needs that we really must think about ways of meeting these needs. One of the consistent findings from the recent research on kids who have experienced trauma is that they are always anxious. They may not appear to be anxious, but we know that they're anxious. We know that from the research that's been done. We know, for example, that they have high levels of stress hormones in their blood. That doesn't mean that they're full of fear, it just means that they're anticipating something happening. We know that they have high levels of inflammation markers in their blood. What that suggests is that their bodies are ready to fight unseen threats. They're continually alert to the possibility of something happening. And we know that with all the new research around brain scans, one particular area of their brain tends to be hyperactive compared with other kids who haven't experienced severe threats and severe trauma. And that part of the brain is the part of the brain that deals with threat. It anticipates threat. The internal feelings of these kids, the emotions, the thinking, is quite different to those of kids who haven't experienced severe trauma. This is what Bruce Perry tells us. Bruce Perry is one of the leading researchers looking at the impact of trauma on the brains of kids. Here's what he tells us, that traumatized children reset their normal level of arousal. Even when no external threats exist, they are in a persistent state of alarm. There may not appear to be an alarm, but we know that is a fact because of what's happening internally. Some children are afraid of a repeat of the trauma that's happened, the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the abandonment, the domestic violence. Other kids are wary of adults. They're not afraid, but they're wary. Some children are afraid of being humiliated and shunned. Some are afraid because they don't understand the language and the intentions of the people that are looking after them. Some are on edge because they don't feel at home culturally. What's happening in the foster home is quite different to what their home culture is about. Some do not understand why they feel afraid, they just do. Children also need to feel emotionally safe. They need to know that their emotions, their thoughts, their perceptions are acknowledged, are respected, and are taken into account. The researcher James Anglin from Canada did a lot of research with kids in care. He found that in most cases the caregivers have the right intentions and the right motives, but sometimes they get focused on the behaviours of the kids in care and not on the emotions that lie behind those behaviours. He found that the most common word that children in care use to describe their lives is pain, emotional pain. This pain tends to get acted out through isolating themselves, sometimes through harming themselves, sometimes through being aggressive, and sometimes through using substances like alcohol. And isn't that just what Lisa did when she had her emotional pain? James Anglin called these pain-based behaviours, and he said that the central challenge is this. He said it's dealing with primary pain without unnecessarily inflicting secondary pain through controlling and punitive reactions. And isn't that just what we did with Lisa? Instead of trying to understand her inner pain and what she was trying to tell us through her use of alcohol, we just focused on her disobedience and her use of alcohol instead of what was driving that problem. Lisa may have been physically safe with us, but we had a lot to learn about the meaning of emotional safety. In the next two videos, we'll be looking at some of the simple strategies we can use to ensure that children are emotionally safe. There are many aspects of safety. For instance, children need to be socially safe. That means comfortable with the adults around them, comfortable with their peers, comfortable in school. They need to be culturally safe. They need to know that their language, their rituals, their celebrations are understood and are respected. For some children, safety revolves around issues of identity, on sexual identity, for example, and on religion. The majority of children in our lucky country, those who have safe parental connections, do not have the need to feel safe because they are safe most of the time. This is clearly not the case with most of the children in foster care. They rely on us to create a place of safety for them, a place where they can let down their guard, where they can relax, and where they can get on with life. Lisa left us the next year, and I lost track of what was happening with her. But a few years later, I ran into her in a cafe. She was working as a waitress, and she greeted me warmly, thank goodness. And we reminisced about people we knew, her plans for the future, and her studies. I think after all the interactions with Lisa and the other kids, I must have been, after all, a good enough youth worker, even though we get some things wrong from time to time. So the first core need of children who have been exposed to severe adversity and trauma is the need to feel safe. In the next two short videos, I'll be looking at the other two core needs. I'll just leave you with this quote from Bessel van der Kolk, one of the preeminent researchers in the field. He says this: "Being able to feel safe with other people is the single most important aspect of mental health."